And we welcome everyone to this evening's JOCO conversation with Professor James Simmons, Professor of Africana Studies at Cal State University, help me Lord, California State University, Northridge. Going on to our second installment on white right terrorism, what we need to know now, part 2.
All right.
We acknowledge as African descended people that we're doing to liberate ourselves. We do on the unceded lands of First Nations people. In our case, coming to you from the Los Angeles Basin, and those First Nations people are the Tongva people. If anybody joins us through the Zoom link, we're going to ask you to mute your mic. Be aware of muting your mic. If you're not speaking, have your video off as James is presenting. And so you can select speaker view so you can see what's going on and who's talking on your screen. Q&A will be opened at all up in between the program because James likes to take questions as he goes. There'll certainly be time for that. You can also put questions in the chat or use the raise hand icon. The election of Donald Trump was said to embolden the militant fringe of white nationalists in the US. The so-called alt-right emerged with its leaders, rank and file, grabbing screen time to warn of the coming civil war and present their arguments for establishing an ethno-state. Elected legislators and mainstream media pundits reference versions of a great replacement narrative in which non-white immigrant hordes conspire with Jewish elites to displace whites from their rightful position of political and cultural hegemony. All this saw a dramatic culmination when a coalition of some of these groups staged an armed attack on the US Capitol last year, with some, as of yet unspecified degree, of collusion with government officials and members of Capitol law enforcement agencies. There was a bit of nail biting to be heard among pundits when these same folks issued threats of reprisals if the midterm election results were unsatisfactory. We need to understand now that these ideas, the ideologies they inhabit, and the varied organizations that represent them are not fragile, fringe, inconsequential, or kooky. They are part of America's essential white supremacist subculture, described by the Department of Homeland Security as this nation's foremost domestic terror threat. They are part of a robust international community of white supremacists that have been reestablishing themselves in mainstream Western political life for decades. And we welcome back our good brother, James Simmons. And this evening, we are going from the mercenary terrorism of slavers and slave catchers through post-Reconstruction terror. And that being said, good brother James, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Well, look at me looking crazy. Gotta put on my hat right. All right. Most of the terrorism that existed during the time of enslavement for African people in the United States and the initiation of it coming out of Africa and then spreading across the Atlantic to South America, the Caribbean, Central America. This was almost purely economic terrorism. Besides taking possession of people who were caught up in wars in Africa, and one nation or one tribe selling the people, the captives of their enemies. Europeans, Arabs, and others turned Africa into like a game reserve, and see who you can catch. And the stronger the specimen, of course, the better to work. But they didn't want them too strong. When if there were no captives from war, their people went out to hunt. This idea that Africans were just game, eventually to become chattel, to personal property, or real property, that dehumanizing mindset when Africans would get caught up on the continent, they, of course, and probably everybody on this broadcast would know, but for those who may hear it, those Africans captured, either straight out or captured by other Africans and sold, went to these factories by the sea, where often you would find the captives in very cramped quarters, horrifying conditions. And I've never been there, but I'm told that the stench from centuries ago remains in the walls and the floors of these dungeons as they were being transported to the West. Okay, can I share my screen?
Absolutely, I will stop my share.
Okay. One second.
And a reminder, if you have any video or anything you're showing, you got to optimize for sound.
That what?
You'll have to optimize, click the optimize for sound and video.
Right. And I know better than I should. Many times that has happened in class. Okay. Boop. Okay. Like we went over the glossary last time, but again, I kind of spelled it out. This time, some of these are very plain definitions. Some of them are so-called official definitions. Some are just, hey, got it out of the dictionary, Britannica or other places. One thing that I wanted to do, reiterate in particular, is the notion of counterterrorism. Black people are often accused of terrorism, from Nat Turner to the Black Panther Party, Black Liberation Army, the NAACP in Monroe, North Carolina, and others who would fight terror by force of arms. And I just thought it would be fitting. George Jackson, author of Blood in My Eye, Field Marshal of the Black Panther Party, said, "We Blacks have lived with terrorism for generations. It no longer affects us. It will intensify. We must prepare a counterterrorism. A man can never be so repressed that he cannot strike back in some way." In some way. it doesn't have to be some kind of perfect balance, and you don't have to match arm for arm or experience for experience. But there is something that Black people can do. If the state doesn't do it, which it did not do, and when I mean the state, of course, I mean the national, state, local, county, city government. So when the state won't intervene, it is up to us in the community, and in whatever we can click up with folks to form at least anti-terror. Now, George Jackson spoke of counter-terror, but at least let us have some anti-terror, whether that's, again, being on the lookout, whether that's being, putting up locks and doors. Comrade George was speaking more of an affirmative response. And this is what Sekou Odinga mentioned on a recent trip to Los Angeles. He said that someone asked him about the Black Liberation Army. And he said, well, basically it was a counterterrorism. It was in part of its intent. It was counterterrorism. But he said that they kind of jumped the gun. They weren't prepared, and the people weren't prepared, and caused many casualties. People locked in prison for decade upon decade. One of the last Panthers, or last members of the Black Liberation Army to get out of prison will be Mutulu Shakur, the Shakur clan out of the BLA, because they have their own structure, but he's been in about 40 years. And again, they kept him in prison for an additional, I think, 8 years, because he made a phone call to Cal State Northridge and spoke with Danny Glover and spoke with the students about being active and concerned about their community. And for that, he got 8 more years. So the idea of counterterrorism, I think, is very important. Again, massacres, riots, up until the 60s, pretty much the term riot applied primarily to white people going nuts and ransacking Black neighborhoods and killing and maiming Black people. So when we say riots, immediately that comes to mind, but it really shouldn't, because Black people were on the late rate in terms of riots. Rebellions, maybe. Riots, not so much. The idea of terrorism, the unlawful use or threatened use of violence committed against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. This is from the FBI, who wasn't interested. They're a Johnny-come-lately to anti-terrorism in terms of addressing anti-Black, racist, right-wing terror, even though they were a target. Again, President Trump said, basically gave the order, no, we're not going to talk about that. Even though the FBI, which he hates because they're sniffing out his dirt, the FBI was coming under increasing attack. It is a good movie. It's fictional, but it has a lot of elements that are real. And one is this idea of the United States being controlled by Zionists, and it's a Zionist occupation government. And the white man has to fight, I guess, either to keep what they've earned as Americans, or just, knock this government down because it is against the interest of white people. But this, and there's so many different definitions of terrorism. I'm just using this and all these other definitions in general, because all of them have, every single term has multiple definitions for it. So this is a clip from Eyes on the Prize, where the attorney for the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party out of Washington, D.C., they were trying to get their credentials to speak at the committee. And this is what he had to say about terrorism in Mississippi. I did it again.
Is your link not linking, James?
Can you see it?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just bail out and come back in. Stop that share.
Decision would be made by the Credentials Committee. On Saturday, August 22nd, America watched this nationally televised hearing.
It is the very terror that these people are living through that is the reason that Negroes aren't voting, that they're kept out of the Democratic Party by the terror of the regular party. And what I want the Credentials Committee to hear is the terror which the regular party uses on the people of Mississippi, which is what Reverend King was explaining, which is what Aaron Henry was explaining, and which is what the next witness will explain, Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rooseville, Mississippi. Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Simmons. If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America?
We will return to this scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House and NBC's Robert Goralski.
Lyndon Johnson cut off coverage of MFDP testimony by making a last-minute request for network airtime.
Now, one of the things that the television audience missed out on was Fannie Lou Hamer describing the torture that had been inflicted upon her, about the beating she received on order of the state police that gave alcohol to 2 Black inmates, and they took turns beating her, beat her till they got tired, and then hand the club or the blackjack, whatever they use, to continue beating her while holding her down. And she suffered permanent physical damage because of that. Second. All right. So again, I can make this available for people if they want to go a little further in depth or review this material and get the citations. Besides the activity on the continent itself, the slave raids, the wars, there was the trade itself, the triangular trade, right? Going from the Africa to South America, the Caribbean to North America, and misery all along. This is a description of a slave ship coming out of Mozambique with 500 Africans. They decided to revolt. They attacked the officer and the crew. They got their irons off and then liberated the women. The captain gave his crew cutlasses, swords, and firearms, and they said they fired down amongst the Africans for half an hour or more. In about half an hour, they were subdued, probably quite a few dead. Retaliating, some of the rebels then hung as a rope around their necks and drawn up to the yard arm, clear of the sail. They didn't kill them, but only choked them and strangled them. They were then shot in the breast and the bodies thrown overboard, while the legs of about a dozen were chopped off. When the feet fell on deck, they were picked up by the Brazilian crew, thrown overboard, irons and all. The woman was hung up and shot. It didn't kill her, but she was thrown overboard anyway and struggled until she sank. They flogged people very severely. Flesh of some of them was flogged, putrefied, and came off. The Africans writhed in the most intense agony. Horrible sight during the passage. And unsurprisingly, there was no disturbance on board after this on the part of the survivors, mostly Negroes from 9 or 10 up to 30 years. I think this is the point of terrorism. This is the point of terrorism in the United States. They don't want no insurrections. They don't want no uprisings. And it largely accomplished this to where even nonviolent struggle is frowned upon. Of course, nonviolent struggle takes on, I guess, is deemed worthy of the same response as violent struggle, with bombings and assassinations and torture. Now, this is a woodcut where they threw, showing that they were throwing these Africans overboard to escape payment on the import tax, get rid of the evidence of illegal slaving. Again, not what you might call a traditional means of terrorism, but tortuous and terrifying to anyone who happened to be left alive. Hey. Oh, I saw him on a broadcast right now. If you could set it right there.
Yeah.
I appreciate you.
I had an event yesterday. They got a bunch of food left over.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, my door was open. I got a pineapple though.
It's good news.
Yeah, so these kind of human rights abuses, I would describe as terrorism. Again, putting people's lives on the same level as a piece of or a piece of livestock. And like you fish and you don't like the fish, you throw it into the ocean. You don't care about what happens to it. And this is what was happening here. The slave codes, and we're going to go back to this whole middle passage in a minute. But the slave codes defined basically what African people were, what Black people were, their legal status. Much like a felon or illegal, so-called illegal alien, Black people could not have weapons to defend themselves. A lot of this came out of the Stonewall Rebellion, some of the harsh slave codes. They could not own property, not allowed to testify in court against a white person, and could not serve on juries. Can you imagine? You can't even testify against the person who attacked you. You might be the only witness. Well, of course, those people are going to walk free. If they've committed an act of terrorism against you, your family, your neighborhood, whatever, you're powerless to say anything. Could not enter any legal contract, including marriage, and there was no right to vote. And these are some of the simplest ones. Not being able to read, especially after Nat Turner, they say, well, he read the Bible, and this is one of the things we feared, that they were going to read. And so after capturing Nat Turner, after killing he and his followers, and then committing mass murder, terrorism on the rest of the people who they thought might do it. Could have been they were just happened to be African and in the area, but they wanted to terrorize people into not even thinking about rebellion after that. And some of the slave codes prohibited reading, prohibited educating Negroes beyond that which would make them useful for their service. The Black codes. Well, this is the slave codes in 1705.
Okay.
The Virginia Assembly said, what are we going to do about these Africans? If they weren't Christians in Africa, they should be accounted and be slaves. All Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves within this dominion shall be held real estate, again, like a plot of land. If such slave resist his master, correcting such slave, and shall happen to be killed in such correction, the master shall be free of all punishment. As if such accident never happened. Of course, it didn't happen much because they were a financial investment. So the code served as a model for other colonies. They couldn't have fines, so they had to inflict corporal punishment. Slaves had to have written permission to leave the plantation that most of the whites couldn't even read. Slaves found guilty of murder, rape, were hanged. That for robbing or other major offense, 60 lashes and placed in stocks where ears would be cut off. And for minor offenses, such as associating with white slaves, would be whipped, branded, or maimed. Now, of course, some of this is done by the authorities, but some of it is not. Some of it is left up to the citizenry and the paddy rollers, the patrollers. So there's a book, Sketches in the History of the Underground Railroad, talking about the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793, because slavery was going to be legal. Now, the trafficking in slaves, there was a deadline in the early 1800s, but if someone was enslaved and they ran away, the Fugitive Slave Act required the state, wherever they were captured, to be returned. That's why a lot of times they did not even stop in any of the states. Like Boston was supposed to be safe, but they kept right on through to Canada, because Canada was not a slave country. Also into Mexico. Sometimes they would run into Mexico. But this flyer is, there's a slave hunter among us, because it was profit.
Mhm.
Kidnapping people was their stock and trade. That, you know, and I don't think we could look at it any other way. This was kidnapping.
Mhm.
Now, one of the and that's later on in terms of terrorism, description of terrorism. If you kidnapping used to be grabbing somebody and taking them to another country. In jolly old England and the common law, but now it's broke down if you just take somebody from one place to another, one state to another. Of course, that's a federal crime, but not back then. It was officially sanctioned by the United States government. And then we're going to see here. Slaves were returned, required to be returned, just like what do you call it? Extradition. Like if you get caught on a federal crime in another state, it's not really extradition. It's already, the path is already clear. The Constitution says they have to return, and at most they'll do pretty much a identity hearing to make sure you are the person who's supposed to be sent. So here, a fugitive slave named Solomon Smith was captured in Louisiana, but before he could be returned to his owner, he was charged with firing at and wounding with intent to kill William Hungerford, while Hungerford was attempting to capture Smith and a number of other runaways. So again, self-defense. This might be an example of counter-terror. They're trying to kidnap you and put you back into bondage, and he defends himself. Well, this hypocrisy, this contradiction, inherent contradiction, what they call a double character of slavery. On one hand, enslaved people were persons capable of committing crimes and standing trial for them. On the other hand, they were property destined to be returned to their owners. So here you have the United States government saying you have to return them because they're mere property. They can't vote, they can't read, they can't do things that a regular person would do, supposedly protected by the laws of this country or the laws of the colonies and the laws of the United States. They're either property or they're persons. Well, here, the United States Supreme Court said, well, this time you're going to be a person because you attacked a white man.
Mhm.
And he was tried and sentenced and hanged. Again, you have people trying to make a profit off of kidnapping and kidnapping people and putting them back into slavery. And here's this other case. George Smith, caught in Pennsylvania.
And the Fugitive Slave Act said of 1850, they said they don't even have to have a trial. A federal magistrate, upon satisfactory proof being made, to grant certificates that empowered slaveholders to pursue and reclaim any person held in service or labor. It's like, what's the name? The bounty hunter? You know,
Dog.
Dog the bounty hunter. These recovery agents for repossessions. This is what they're doing. There's some property running around. Well, this property got upset, acted like a human being, and attempted to protect himself. Well, so was he going to be prosecuted as a person, or was he going to be returned as a piece of property? And in this case, I guess maybe it was a very feeble attempt. They returned him to his supposed owner. Because the Supreme Court denied the constitutionality of any state law or regulation which interrupts, limits, delays, or postpones the rights of the owner to the immediate command of his service or labor. So he was returned to his owner. So you have these bounty hunters, again, mercenaries. I mean, essentially, that's what they are, mercenaries, committing crimes. I mean, and it's like, regardless of whether it was legal in the United States or not, or encouraged by the United States, the federal government. They were engaged in mercenary military work. I can't think of them as anything other than terrorists. So the post-slavery terrorist organizations, who doesn't know about the Ku Klux Klan? Don't everybody know about the Ku Klux Klan? You'd be surprised. You would be surprised. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona in high school, and I started talking about the Klan, and these people thought, what are you talking about? You white people run around with pointed hats. Man, that's crazy. I can imagine the same conversation happening now.
Absolutely.
Because, they come on the news every once in a while, but the people aren't being taught about it.
Absolutely.
So formed in 1865 in Pulaski, Tennessee. Became the largest and at this point the oldest terrorist organization in the United States. Of course, they were battling the changing of social traditions and laws. They were battling the Reconstruction and the rule of radical Republicans, including Black people. This is what they did: by force of arms, with acts of terror, with murder, with assassination, with torture. They effectively overthrew the government, the Reconstruction governments. Those especially Black folks, other radical Republicans who were willing to attempt to stomp out white supremacy and enforce the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution. They refused, and they fought. They committed atrocity upon atrocity. And they prevailed. Again, there was a compromise between the Republican and Democratic Party. Democratic Party had won the election. Again, a controversy. And they gave up. They said, okay, you can have the presidency, but you got to end Reconstruction. And the terrorism worked.
Right. Yeah.
It absolutely worked. And I think this is why they're having such a hard time now. Letting go of this, oh, this is just our culture and our tradition. No, it was a great victory. They lost the war, and then they won the war. They won the war of terror.
We won the peace.
Yeah.
And soon after that, it became unbearable for Black people. It's just like at every turn, there was something going wrong, which is why, there were several waves of people out of the South, the great migrations. And after Reconstruction, it's like, actually, even at the end of slavery, people left. They went to the West trying to find freedom. And after Reconstruction, people fleeing the terror of the Ku Klux Klan and these other organizations. It was so bad, they passed the Ku Klux Klan Act, which referred to organizations like the Klan in trying to tamp down the violence. But they did whatever the hell they liked, essentially. They say, oh, this is unconstitutional, kind of like you hear now. Oh my God, you're attacking our president who just happened to take secret files home. That fomented an insurrection, that everything he charges other people with, he has done triple fold. So after Reconstruction, after the defeat of Reconstruction, the Klan kind of faded away, but then it was rejuvenated in 1914 by William Joseph Simmons, no relation that I know of, I hope, ever, resurrected the Klan at Stone Mountain, which is interestingly becoming increasingly Black in recent years. They were resurrected, and the great president, what's his name? Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
Again, showing Birth of a Nation. He said it was like history written in lightning. He loved the Klan. He was friends to the filmmaker, I believe. And things became worse for Black folks. I think it was Wilson who officially segregated the federal government. I think it was Wilson. He certainly didn't object to it, but he had no sympathy for Black folks. And again, as Black people were being lynched around the country during his administration, he did nothing to stop it. And actually, that was one of the other words in terms of lynching. Sometimes sanctioned by the community, but a lawless group of people who commit murder, sometimes coupled with torture, to preserve tradition or some other excuse. But some of the worst atrocities, and many people have noted, it's like they don't do this in savage nations, boiling people and burning them and all those things that they did to Black folks during that time period. The Black Legion, a spinoff of the KKK. And I always wonder why they call themselves the Black Legion. But it's because they, instead of the white robes of the Ku Klux Klan, they wore black robes. And people liked the black robes, so they got kicked out of the Greater Klan. They were a clavern, I guess, but they got kicked out of the Greater Klan. but anti-Black, anti-Jewish, anti-Catholic, and they would, anti-wife beating. They had some kind of moral fiber, I guess.
Reformers.
Huh?
They were reformers.
Yes. But they would also carry out terrorist acts, beatings, murders. They were, again, their moral code, I think they were anti-alcohol, and I think they were anti-gambling and anti-wife beating. But they were murderers and torturers. They were terrorists. So, like the Taliban's against drugs too. So what, considering what they have done? So the Black Legion, again, active in Ohio and Michigan. And in doing this research, I found the town my father was born in. It's like 1700 Black Legion. In the little small town of Lima, Ohio. And they had a military-like structure. They had generals, they had other ranks, and acted in the military way. They started allowing women in at some point, a woman's auxiliary, but again, women not allowed to join the Black Legion as a regular member. Knights of the White Camellia. So you can see from this drawing, like the White League, Knights of the White Camellia, and other organizations use terrorism, again, to attack freed people. They were based in Louisiana. And of course, like most of the other organizations, they became extinct pretty much. I'm sure there's probably some reboot of the Knights of White Camellia now, but they are far, the Klan is far more popular. Red Shirts, North Carolina. Again, these are all functionaries of the Democratic Party. They're active, politically active, and they wore red shirts, red tunics, derived from the South Carolina red shirts. So they were supposed to have appeal to all these, like have a grassroots appeal. Ministers, a congressman, a governor, and the Republicans, what they call Republican fusionists, still fighting to maintain some semblance of power after Reconstruction. And they use, again, terrorism to threaten and intimidate the Black and white populists and Republicans. Again, used to parade around with pistols. I mean, it's just like, this is such a repeat of what's happening now. It's such a repeat to what has happened before. Beatings, whippings, assaults, and murder. Again, they call it murder, a lot of it political assassinations. Shooting into the residence of their opponents. Preventing non-Democrats from getting to the polls. So one attacked a Republican governor, and others paraded in front of the governor's mansion. Aren't they just having now a trial about plotting to kidnap the governor?
Yeah.
I mean, this is all, and people are acting surprised.
Right.
People are acting surprised that this could happen in the United States. It's already happened. This is nothing new. Okay, so let's have some discussion about this stuff.
I wanted to ask a question. So the founding of the Klan, right? I was looking at that. That was immediately after the Civil War, right? 1865.
Yes.
So the same year. I mean, within weeks or months, right?
Yes. Uh-huh.
And then already just 6 years later, there needs to be an act, right? So, I mean, that's I always thought it was, founded just a few years after, right, the Civil War, not so immediately after. But I was wondering about the 1914 revival. Any notion of what they might have been responding to or what precipitated? Because at least the movie comes out the next year, 1915. So any idea why, what was happening in Georgia, 1914, that might have precipitated a revival?
I know there had been around that time, Black people were trying to step up pressure in different parts. There was the Brownsville Rebellion and the Houston Rebellion, I think in 1915. But these things aren't in isolation. Again, you have Black troops who have been trained, who have fought, like my uncle fought in, can't remember whether it was I think it was the Philippines, and came back with that attitude. I'll kill over there for freedom so I could kill here for freedom. He had that spark, and a lot of them did. And this is why I think there were so many rebellions around that period. There was a rebellion in Harlem in the 1920s, but you still had people trying to move. There was the founding of the NAACP, not too long before then, a few years before. So if I can't think of any precipitating event other than the general climate of, there's people moving around the country, Black people moving, again, this great migration, people going up north, people going out west. And
and
I
this
think
is part of what the Klan did to try to keep people from moving so that labor doesn't leave.
Right. And initially, and that's why they were often called the Klan was called a tool of the ruling class, because they would try to keep Black people in their place. Now that was a problem with slavery, because then white men couldn't find work. And maybe because they were being returned to the lower tier work or feared it, that they were trying to keep them here. Now, in the 50s and 60s, there was a Klan song called "Move Them Niggers North."
Okay.
It was just the opposite. Get the niggers out of here. We don't want any.
Changed. Okay. Yeah.
Yes, of course. Conditions changed. The laws changed. And all of a sudden, you don't want Black people in the South. You want them to move north. Again, that's just why so many people, like Black folks in Los Angeles, where we come from, in different parts of the history of this country, there have been these migrations.
I have a question. So the establishment of these codes, and including the Jim Crow laws, right?
Yes.
After emancipation, after as the legal means during that period to keep us contained and controlled, right?
Yes.
So with the overturn of Roe versus Wade, right, part of the conversation has been, here are these unrepealed abortion bans from the 1800s that are now being engaged in some states, in this atmosphere, in this kind of transitional, chaotic atmosphere of no more Roe, what have you. And of course, right, all the conversation about what's going to happen with these other these other statutes that are in place under the same precedents, right? And of course, interracial marriage. So really my question is, would you speculate, or what would you envision could be the domino strategy back to the, just kind of the accessibility of Jim Crow laws, or whatever other kinds, sets of laws, explicitly, just explicit anti-race laws? What might that look like?
You mean reverting back to have a complete reaction, overturning of civil rights laws and that? I think
I'm not talking about drastic, you know what I'm saying, all at once, but I'm, looking again at this scenario that's happening with Roe, with all of these unrepealed laws, on the books that are now up for grabs if people are there to grab them. Yeah.
Yeah, well, one of the, I think, most dangerous people in the Supreme Court is our guy, Clarence Thomas.
You're a friend of mine. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and he does want a drastic return. He's advocating for a drastic return. And his concurring opinion in Dobbs, which invalidated Roe v. Wade. He says, as I have previously explained, substantive due process is an oxymoron that lacks any basis in the Constitution. Well, this is what allowed him to marry his white wife.
Right.
What the hell are you saying? He said, we're going to overturn same-sex marriage. Negro, of course, this is going to, they might overturn you. So yeah, you can chip away, like they keep bouncing around in the military, no gays in the military, but it's not spelled out. Then Bill Clinton says, okay, we're going to spell it out, but don't ask, don't tell. And then people are still getting bounced out of the military. And then Obama says, no, forget about it. We're squashing all of that. Gays can serve in the military. And then Trump comes in and says, no, they can't. And he was bragging about it the other night. He said, oh, no. The first thing I did, that executive order that allowed gays to be in the military, I overturned it. So this is going back and forth, and nothing is fixed. Nothing is fixed. And should there be, they're experimenting with the laws. Well, we don't mean to talk bad about Black people, or like the sheriff's department in Los Angeles. They've segregated prisoners for so long. It's like, this is the only place where it is legalized segregation, as far as I know. Spanish-speaking people over here, Black people over here, white people over here, Asian people over there. And it's accepted. Should a state or a city or a county try to codify that kind of behavior? Oh, for the safety of the children, we're not going to allow people from this zip code or these zip codes to go outside of the zip code. We're gonna work to make their schools better. And of course, they don't get better, but they are prevented from going to say more than 5 miles away. So they don't get bused to the Valley. They get bused to East LA. People from Watts might get bused to East LA or Southgate or something. So, but I think that kind of thing is foreseeable. It happens in every society. It would be dangerous. It would be dangerous for the United States. And I think there would be there's a lot of talk about civil war right about now.
Right.
And civil war. And again, people are acting surprised, but we've had a civil war that ended in 1865. And then we had Reconstruction, which was another civil war. And then we had war in the streets in the 60s and the 70s. And we had war in the street in pretty much since, what's his name? I can't think of his name, Brown, Eric Brown?
Oh, Mike Brown?
Mike
Yeah.
Brown, Michael Brown. Cities have been going up in smoke, one after the other. And you have people in the street like the Knights of the White Camellia, like the red shirts, like the Ku Klux Klan, to try to supposedly keep order. The Black Legion. So
what is the young man's name from Illinois who went into Wisconsin?
Rittenhour?
And was acquitted.
yes.
Rittenhour, Kyle?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And this legacy of impunity. Legacy of impunity. Of what? Enabling anti-Black and anti-non-white white violence through various kinds of various kinds of impunity. Just really is the basis. That's these folks know they have nothing. They're all this bravado. It's laughable because you have actually the will of the state, behind you. You're not. This is not mano a mano. This is you and the United States government and the police forces and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
attacking, attacking people. But yeah. And I think that, and I hope in with folks watching this and continuing to watch with us, join us as we, develop the conversation. We'll be able to start making these kinds of connections. And something that I'm really glad that you did, James, was talk about some of these other organizations, because the Klan is so iconic in American culture that no doubt many people think, beside them being forgotten, often lost to historical memory in younger generations. I've absolutely witnessed that. Folks can also easily think they're the only, that the Klan is somehow singular as an organization, and then not have a lot of clarity about, I know that there's some of these, whoever the neo-Nazis are and whoever but it's not, just a whole kind of lack of clarity of the diversity of these organizations and the conditions in which they proliferate. Just like they said after Obama's election, how not only the proliferation of white supremacist organizing in people joining, but in new organizations being formed, right? Being established.
Yeah. And I want to also point out that these weren't the only organizations. The ones mentioned tonight, the four that were mentioned tonight, they're not the only organizations. And outside of the organizations, community sanctioned terrorism was the norm. That's why you could grab a Black victim, kidnap a Black victim, torture them, advertise in the paper, hanging at the fairground tomorrow at noon. Advertise it. And then carry it off with thousands of people watching as someone is chopped into pieces and burned. So the thousands of lynching, look, when I was a kid, we had all these books around, and we charged genocide, 100 years of lynching, and 100 years of lynching. Up until the time I read 100 Years of Lynching, I thought Black people were lynched by the Ku Klux Klan. And if you've ever read 100 Years of Lynching, very seldom is the Klan mentioned.
Right.
These were community efforts.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They were community efforts and inflicting the most horrible tortures on people, on men, women, and children. So, while these organizations are important and very dangerous and should be dealt with, it's still a larger problem, as we saw with Ahmaud Arbery. Devil's chasing him down
Right.
and then executing him. And don't say surprised that they're taken in front of a jury.
Right.
Zimmerman trying to be white. You know, not really, kind of, maybe by some people considered white, but a lot of people, oh no, it's like these damn people. And I say it's crazy. Gil Cedillo. You know, I went to school with this dude at a progressive law school, and you tolerating this BS. You know, I just have higher expectations. But you're trying to dilute the strength of Black voters, and you're talking bad about the indigenous people of Mexico. And I don't care if you're fiending for this Nuri Martinez or not. Why would you let her say some shit like that? Why would you sit there and tolerate it?
Right.
I mean, the Mexican mafia got more sense than that now. They're trying to work it out with Black folks. They said, you know what? You Black people were right. They are the enemy. They are the enemy.
And you know, something else about our disrupted collective memory and the kind of surprise that we experience and outrage and, you know, kind of these strange expectations we have of the system when really you're just talking about the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. This is legacy, you know, culture. This is legacy culture. This is passed down. This is, you know, the people that killed Ahmaud Arbery, their grandparents were in the generation of people, you know, who still had free reign, right, to abuse us in any way they saw fit, you know. We unfortunately kind of have a really short memory. We've grown very comfortable with our ability to have free passage, to feel comfortable in public space, to pretty much travel where we listeth, you know, wherever we care to, you know.
Even though we feel uncomfortable in many of those spaces we go into, right? But that, you know, that is a purposefully suppressed memory. I mean, so, you know, that the propaganda machine is working overtime, right, to not share those stories, right? And I mean, this is already you know, people are getting apoplectic over teaching African history, just the history of the United States, just on its face, right? And you can't even call it slavery, right? Right. They're changing it in the books. So yeah, it is, you know, it's been actively repressed. And so, you know, I can understand why folks need to be reminded regularly because of that. And, you know, this conversation, I mean, it's so clear the way in which these civil society, civilian organizations, right, are adjuncts to the state, right, and the continuing running of the political economy, right, keeping us as property and labor. But then these other, you know, areas of the civil society, and I'm specifically thinking about how we started, right, with the clips from Birth of a Nation. And, you know, that narrative, like you said, the president, you know, calling it history, right? This particular piece of propaganda, people take it for history, right? And that kind of suppressed memory becomes the common sense of the country. And then you get these, you know, these period movies that imagine a 19th century with Black people moving around freely.
Oh my God. Oh,
It's crazy.
Crazy.
I was some mess last night. And I was like, you know what? It's a 1961 and some Black folks sitting next to some white folks in the court. I was like, this is about to be this is a lie.
Exactly,
Still a
right?
lie.
And
Yeah.
for some preferred past, right? And instead of these being, like these this is the structure of the society, right? This violence being absolutely constituent of the society. These are the mistakes that can be corrected, or all these, other things. Somehow they're anomalous to what the United States actually is, right? But yeah, so that's why people are having a hard time remembering that, being surprised, right? This notion that we can all get along together and somehow have been magically since, say, 1975 or something like that.
Yeah.
And another component of that suppressed memory is the ways that we have suppressed our own memory through, we are a terrorized people, we are a traumatized people. And I've heard more than one member of like our mother's generations, the 80-year-olds, to talk about how, well, we stopped talking about, the reality of these power relations and anti-Black brutality and all these things, because we genuinely thought that this was, which is totally understandable, that all these changes that we're seeing are momentous, are, somehow etched in stone, and didn't want to carry over the bad memories from the past. There is this kind of piece at work, and also just the silence about the violence. My friend and I took a notion. We wanted to start interviewing elder Black people about Jim Crow, the Jim Crow milieu, the Jim Crow, right? Ambience. And so we interviewed my uncle, who was at the time 90, and someone who was kind of removed, an uncle that I had just moved. And so we did this, interview, and we're talking about, okay, what were relations with, what were the relationships like or whatnot? And so he spun a yarn, went on for a good 30 minutes, very affable, very, right? And at some point, I think we directly asked him about violence, and he said, oh yeah, you mean like there was an incident where they came and got whoever it was, right? And tied him to a truck, essentially by his penis, and drug him around town, But this was after an hour of discussion, about, as if, these were niceties. So there's just this other component where we have to find ways to deal with our trauma, deal with the trauma and the inability, like the way that some of us can't even watch films about slavery or the brutality, can't stand it, it's symptomatic.
When I was in college, I had a girlfriend whose parents were from Mississippi, and I think I was the first Black man she had gone out with, and I guess my constant books, or my books, whatever, kind of radicalized her. The first book I gave her was The West and the Rest of Us, because she worked in the petroleum industry, and I wanted her to know the nature of imperialism. But one of the books that she read was 100 Years of Lynching, which, that book, it's bound to have an effect. So she read it and she said, I don't know about any of this stuff. Why come I don't know any of this stuff? I said, I said, take it to your father, see what he says. She took my book to her father. He had it 1 or 2 weeks. And then he returned it and said, it's not good to, she's wants to ask questions. She's like, it's not good to open up old wounds. So he was trying to make her ignorant. I mean, a conscious effort to make her ignorant. I guess so. She felt she wouldn't feel intimidated, wouldn't be terrorized. But she went crazy for a minute. She went to Mississippi to stay with her grandmother, joined the Republic of New Africa, did all kind of stuff.
All right.
And I have a picture of her with a Klansman, buying a paper from a Klansman. But she came back and married a white man, so it's okay. But the fact that her parents didn't let her know anything about what happened in Mississippi, and returned a book that's really kind of like full of dynamite without comment. And then we have people wonder, being surprised. It's like you hear, Klan not going to come down here. They're not going to come to South Central LA. I said, they were already in South Central LA, right? In Vernon and Six. What are you talking about? Nazis trying to come to Inglewood. What?
Talking about?
Yeah, what are you talking about? They're not scared of you. I mean, they are, but there's still some of them willing to die.
But right.
To keep you in line. You think that, oh, that's some old stuff. Why are you bringing up old shit? When it's just a recurring theme. I mean, we could take the stuff that happened in the 1800s and transplant it to today, and all you have to do is change the technology. Trying to kidnap a governor.
And also, right, it's the nature of political violence in general, right? The ways in which powerful groups control and contain and terrorize the less powerful groups or the oppressed groups. So it also speaks to the fact, whatever the particulars of our brutalization and oppression are, it's not unique. It's not a unique phenomenon. It's a unique story, not a unique phenomenon,
Right.
And so also there's this way that, we decry, oh, that's, history as old stuff, going back to, the way that these educational institutions prepare people to be anti-intellectual and absolutely out of connection, right? With the string of connection of cause and effects, in events. And as they struggle now to stamp out the fires that, the clear exposition of white supremacy and white privilege, I guess, through kind of the legacy of the curriculum of inclusion, the way that's blossomed, and they're trying to, furiously trying to stamp that out, to stamp out that memory, because it's, it's damning. It is damning.
Yeah, and you also have people who want to replace the suppressed memory or the lost memory with some new stuff, like there were no so-called Indians that Black people were indigenous to North America. And even though there's some proof of that, but don't take that little grain of proof and try to replace historical fact. There was no African slave trade.
Come on. There were no ships. There were no ships.
There were no ships. I
told you, have you ever seen one?
Come here. Right.
Yeah, so there ain't no videotape of no ship. Well, of course there wasn't a videotape of the ship. We don't have the same, Africans look different. But this is like really just a bunch of foolishness.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a bunch of foolishness.
Yeah.
And actively people acting out their African anti-African
Willful foolishness.
training.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Willful ignorance. I ain't no African.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like people trying to, oh, there was a woman that worked at Federal Public Defender's Office. She said, I'm not black, I'm Canadian.
Have mercy.
Right.
Okay, you're Canadian, but no,
Right.
I have
Oh.
Indian blood, and I said, you got the same nappy hair, you got the same brown skin, you got the same nose, same lips, same body, same everything as Lakeisha down the street. How you're Canadian? When did Canadians start looking like you?
No, wait. The kids in school. She's not Black. She's Jamaican.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
I'm not even saying believe.
She's Haitian. Right.
She's not Black. She's Jamaican.
Mm-hmm.
But see, that to me, that makes more sense. If you look at Black as a nationality,
Right.
formed in, like people say New African, there are certain circumstances. So they have a nationality, Haitian, they have a nationality,
right? Yes.
Puerto Rican, they have a national, Jamaican, they have a nationality, Kenyan, and then Black people, just Black people. No, we're all Black, but what's our nationality? So I can understand that more than I'm Canadian.
Except middle schoolers and high schoolers aren't thinking in terms of nationalities.
Yeah, I know. That's what I said. I can understand it, but I don't accept. Yeah, that's crazy.
Or even a way of saying mixed, right? Because Caribbean is sometimes a synonym for mixed.
Oh, yeah. Or
with no real understanding of demographics in the Caribbean and Caribbean history and all that, right? So
yeah, like you have hair like a
saying not Black.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's just unfortunate that the information bubble effect. But I mean, it's unfortunate. It's just a challenge of the digital information age and the internet age. It's just a challenge that we're, right, maturing to meet, but creates these pockets where the craziness is reinforced, gets reinforced and kind of expands exponentially as, more pieces of information get drawn into these absurd logics and these whole worlds are built, that we're combating. But all of that being said, we are actually at time. We are at 8:31. No? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
And thank you so much. We look forward. We have our last installment on Saturday.
That's right.
Yeah, we'll be coming from the civil rights era to the present. We're just wearing you out, James. We're milking you like an information cow.
That's right.
Get it.
Yeah. 3 sessions in 7 days.
Right? That's
8
a
days.
lot.
Yeah.
No, that's good. But at least they're 1 hour. They're not 3 hours.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. See? So that does help. And
but this is good.
We're at the same time Saturday, 4 again, 4
4 o'clock. Yeah.
4 o'clock.
That works. 4 p.m. Pacific.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Yes. And so thank you. And we fail to introduce ourselves. We introduce our guests. We don't introduce
we
ourselves.
never introduce ourselves.
Yes.
We're the Joko Collective.
We're Joko Collective.
Tasha and Youssef. Mila is on hiatus right now.
Yes. And all to the good.
All to the good. Once again, this was an excellent continuation of the conversation we started on Saturday. So I'm looking forward, as we go into this next phase, because I have some questions I want to ask, but I think they're more appropriate for our final step.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Well, see, it helps to have people with the critical thinking skills and intellectual capacity to ask questions that are going to benefit more than just the curiosity of one person.
Yeah. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That being said, if anybody is joining us who's on our Evite list, please plan to join us in conversation on Saturday. The more, the merrier.
Yes.
More, the smarter, the more
Right.
the
Yes,
more
a critical
dynamic
mass.
session, the critical mass of
That's
brain
right.
power, right? Critical mass
Right.
of brain power to the people, period.
People, period.
All
All
right.
right.
And if you're joining us on YouTube, join us again Saturday, 4 p.m. Pacific,